Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so I was informed that I had not recorded, or at least the audio that I'd recorded for The Great Society was the wrong audio, or at least the one I uploaded was the wrong audio. And I've switched computers, so now I have to re-record it, which really isn't that bad because I kind of didn't really even like the first recording that I did. I know it sounds terrible to say. You guys would be amazed how often I record a video and then realize there's something about it I don't like and re-record it. Like, you guys would be amazed how often I do that. But for those of you guys who are not even really joining us, but I guess if you guys are joining us, you know, you have the collapse of the multiverse, the various incursions that are happening, which means basically Earth from alternate realities crashing into each other. And what we had here was Reed Richards building what was called a bridge. And this bridge basically served the purpose of allowing the new Avengers, the Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, to essentially peer into other universes, to see how other universes are faring with the incursions. Because one of the things that they were told by Black Swan at the beginning of all this, right, when we covered the very first volume of this, the collapse of the multiverse, all that kind of stuff, how it was all ending, the introduction of Black Swan as a new character, she basically iterated or really kind of provided us with this scenario that in other universes, people respond to the incursions in different ways. Some people have used cosmic cubes. Other universes have done the exact same thing that was done in the main Marvel universe, where they used an Infinity Gauntlet and things didn't work. That there are some universes where people destroyed their own Earths and then took residence in a new planet. And when they did that, sometimes they would save the humans on their world. Sometimes they would just abandon it and just destroy it, and whoever, you know, and just essentially save themselves. There were instances when other races would destroy their Earth when they figure out what was going on, that like Galactus would show up to Earth and then obliterate it in order to save that universe. We saw it playing out in different ways. And so the idea behind this bridge is to basically, in one way, verify the authenticity of what it was that Black Swan said. And then two, if there are other Earths out there that are basically solving the incursions, then figuring out how it is that they're doing that, right? Because maybe they thought of something that everybody here hasn't thought of yet. And so what it does is, of course, it basically brings together Namor the Submariner and Black Panther. Now, Black Panther is the one who at the moment is cataloging these various worlds, and what he's found is that world after world, the ones that he's seen really just kind of seem to fall the same way. That either they're destroyed by the map makers, they're destroyed by the Black Priests, which we haven't really talked about in depth yet, but we will. They're kind of a special scenario, and in reality, it wasn't really until Jonathan Hickman's Avengers, the New Avengers ended, that I actually realized what the Black Priests were, right? But we'll talk more about them once we cross that bridge. And then, of course, you know, you basically end up having a lot of the worlds that are, or I'm sorry, a lot of the universes that are being destroyed when they're crashing into each other. But there is one particular world that T'Challa came across where they've survived not just one incursion, but two. And so the question is, how in the world did they manage to pull that off? And so what Hickman does is he gives us a little bit of backstory here. And what we end up finding out is this world is home to a group called the Great Society. Now, first things first, the Great Society is basically a stand-in for the Justice League, is really all they are. And I'll talk more about that here in a second. But the cool thing about this is that what you had at some point in time, really about 4 years prior to what's going on at the moment, or maybe even a little bit longer than that, is you had what were called the Archetypes of Justice. Now, the indication here is this is the only superhero team that existed on Earth. It was basically Wolverine, Psylocke, that reality's version of Namor the Submariner, and a couple others. But what you ended up having is what Jonathan Hickman refers to as xenogenesis. It was basically a combination of the Kree and the Skrulls working together, is basically what it is. Now, we're not given a lot of backstory here. We don't know what really led to this conflict. We don't know what led to the Kree and the Skrull teaming up and basically working with each other against the superheroes on Earth. We don't really know what the case is. But what we do know is that these superheroes basically fell. Now, assuming there were no X-Men, that there were no Justice League or anything like that, that basically these superheroes fell and the world was successfully conquered by the Kree and the Skrulls. We can largely assume other superheroes did exist for a couple different reasons. One is because in the fall of the Archetypes of Justice, we saw the rise of the Great Society, and two, it just makes good sense, right? To just believe that other superheroes existed. It just seems reasonable. But the reality of this, and the important thing here, is that when the Earth was conquered, or at least this alternate reality was conquered by the Kree and the Skrulls, the Great Society rose up basically as kind of like a group of outcast superheroes that essentially cast off the Kree and the Skrulls and then saved the world. And so following that, they ushered in what was called this Great Society, in the sense that it was kind of in an age of enlightenment, right? So like the science games, championing the advancement of human potential, different things along those lines. And so these guys were basically the new wave, the new crop of superheroes, and have kind of been leading the world ever since, saving the planet from a multitude of different threats. But the important thing here is what we end up doing is basically picking up up with a guy by the name of Wayne. Now, Wayne also goes by the name Ryder, and he is basically Batman in this particular universe. What we also know is that some kind of an event had basically taken place where about 100 men, women, and children had died. And the result of this is that Wayne routinely goes back and visits this marker as a way to honor their memory, right? So it seems to have been a mistake that he made that led to them dying. And this is a very important element because what it does is it shows the humanity behind the characters. That with us not really knowing a whole lot about them, we wouldn't really know if they were good guys or bad guys, whatever the case was. You know, if the rise of them in terms of saving the earth led to them becoming these sort of, you know, almost fascist kind of guys, we don't really know. But what we do know now is that they're basically good guys. Now, the other part of this is that a character by the name of the Norn had basically more or less told by virtue of his powers that another incursion was happening. So it's the Great Society's version of an early warning system, but the Norn is a stand-in for Dr. Fate. And so with this happening, of course, you have a coming together of the various guys who were here. And that's where we really sort of get this full-on explanation, or at least this full kind of depiction of the fact that they are more or less the Justice League, right? The Rider is Batman, Boundless is basically the Flash, the Jovian is Martian Manhunter, the Norn is Dr. Fate, Sun God is essentially Superman, and Dr. Spectrum is basically the Green Lantern. And so much like we've seen with you know, the main Illuminati themselves, you kind of get a speech about, you know, the collapse of the multiverse, but the difference here is that the Great Society looks at this from the perspective of everything lives, right? So they're far more optimistic. They really are just legitimate good guys. The other cool thing about this is that once they end up teleporting to what is essentially the incursion wall, which, as you guys recall, is a kind of barrier, right? So if your left hand is one universe and your right hand is another, what you have is a point where your hands are on the verge of touching. What the incursion wall does is it allows you to pass from your left hand to your right hand, right? It just allows you to move from one universe to the next. And so once they actually get inside that universe and they see that Earth, then now they realize it's an incursion of map makers. And this is important. This is hugely important because one of the things to keep in mind is, again, the map makers are wildly powerful beings. And in every other alternate universe that the Illuminati have looked at and they've seen the map makers arrive, it basically signals the absolute death of every superhero who's there. The map makers automatically react to the powers of the various people who are there. They augment themselves, modify themselves, they overcome those powers, and then they destroy them, and then they destroy the world. No one ever really succeeds in their conflict against the map makers, but the Great Society seems to know of them, and the Great Society has basically found a way to overcome them. And you would think that it would be virtue of some kind of scientific achievement, or they have something like the ultimate nullifier or something like that, you know, their reality's version of this device that can essentially obliterate anything from existence and basically make it as if it never was. You would think it would be something like that. No, it's just the sheer force of their power. That's all it is. It's just the complete and total power that they have. And so what you end up finding out is that one of these guys is actually donning a helmet of the Black Priest. And the reason why this matters is because they successfully managed to repel or at least destroy the bridge builders, right? The forerunners of the map makers. The bridge builders, for those of you guys who don't remember, are the ones who basically show up first. You know, whenever you have a blue Earth, they're the ones who basically show up on the new Earth. They basically wipe out all the superheroes, and then they basically tell the map makers, hey, here's a spot for you to come to. Then the map makers show up and essentially kill any superheroes that the bridge builders couldn't destroy. The bridge builders are obliterated, that blue Earth is destroyed, and then that leads to the arrival of the map makers. And more so than that, the map makers get totally destroyed. But what you end up finding out here is that the Great Society has actually figured things out. They figured out that, like, the ability for the map makers to adapt is based on a piece of technology inside their own bodies, right? That before they can adapt to their powers, to rip that out, to basically destroy the computer components inside their bodies, essentially, right? Their intelligence core, whatever you want to call it. But to rip that out before the map makers can respond is the best thing. That's one of the reasons why Boundless is so important here, because she's able to move so astronomically fast that she can basically act before the map makers have time to. From there, it turns to Sun God. And that's when you really get kind of a full-on display of this guy's power. Because if the fight goes on too long, these map makers would probably overpower the Great Society, right? They would kind of continue to adapt. But Sun God basically channels all the solar energy in his body and lets off this enormous flare, with the rest of the superhero team being protected by Dr. Spectrum. And then, of course, all the map makers are completely and totally obliterated. And that's what makes things kind of bonkers here, is because you have Namor and you have T'Challa who are watching all this go down. And it's like, okay, so like these guys are for real. Like these guys are serious contenders. But notice, this is the funny thing that you do not see here. Neither of them entertained the idea of joining forces. But what you do end up getting is a really cool conversation that goes on here, because Namor the Submariner has become a lot more pessimistic, or you could argue realistic, than Black Panther has. Because for all the vaunted wisdom of Black Panther, for all the vaunted wisdom of T'Challa, right, in the sense that he's so smart and all that kind of stuff, at the end of the day, he's still hopeful. The response of Namor is that hope is the refuge of dying men, Hope is what you have when you have nothing else left. But that's not the reality of the situation that we're in here. You know, the reality that we're in here is we're fighting against hopeless odds. We're like these guys. We have a small victory in a war that we're going to lose. These guys are going to lose this conflict. They're going to lose this war. So they can celebrate all they want to in their achievement in overcoming the map makers, but it won't matter because the multiverse is going to end anyway. It's a very dark perspective to have. But T'Challa really kind of comes back at that and says, no, but it's us as people and what we do in this circumstance is how we respond to it that define us as people. Everything was going to end anyway. It was inevitable that the multiverse was going to end. It was inevitable that even if the multiverse didn't end, that our universe was going to end. In the face of that knowledge, does it mean that we just give up, right? If we knew with absolute certainty that the universe would end, which it will, does that mean that we just refuse to live, right? It'll be billions of years, billions and billions and billions of years before that happens, or at least under any normal circumstance, it would be. With the incursions, it shrinks it at a geometric rate, right? Like it shrinks it at a massive margin. But, you know, he's like, if we're born into this world and then we learn science and we realize that through that science that our universe is going to end at some point, does that mean that at whatever point we learn that, we just sit down and die? No, we live our lives, right? We become honorable people. We have families and all that kind of stuff because one, we know that we're not going to have to worry about seeing the death of those families anytime soon. But two, even though we know our family line will die, that life is still worth living, that it's still worth it to be an honorable and a good person. And that's really what he kind of hits at here, that you look at this as though because of the fact that all hope is lost, because of the fact that there really is no means to save the multiverse, you know, because it is inevitably going to die, that we should somehow just give up on who we are and just do whatever needs to be done in order to save the day. It's us as kings of our respective kingdoms that make us great men because of the actions and the deeds that we do. And Namor comes back with this amazing point and he says, yes, we were kings. And what are we now? We're kings of dead kingdoms, right? We are kings of men who don't really have anything to call our own, right? We're people who are just, you know, watching other universes die and hoping that we can somehow find a way to save our own. All the while, this little voice in the back of our head keeps growing bigger with every incursion that we encounter and every universe that we see destroyed. And it's saying, there's no hope here. There's no way for you guys to win. You're fighting against a hopeless cause. And so with that being the case, you know, as this kind of monitoring of the Great Society's universe continues on, that suddenly Black Panther is like, Namor, you need to look at this. And it's kind of like, okay, like, what am I seeing here, right? With the two of them looking at something, it's like, what in the heck am I seeing here? Like, is this the past? Because if it's the past, none of this really seems familiar. And Black Panther's response is, no, this is 2 hours from now. And what we're basically told here by Hickman is that in 2 hours, the Illuminati are going to confront the Great Society. And the battle to save one of these worlds is going to take place, right? So who wins? Marvel's new Avengers or DC's Justice League? But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.